The Echo House. Discover the tale of the Echo House, where a simple curiosity about a key left hanging in an old neighbor's door leads to a terrifying journey through memories and nightmares. This story weaves a suspenseful mystery shadowed by secrets that bind people to their pasts, and a creature offering keys to face what haunts them most. As you follow the characters, each step forward brings them closer to a choice that could change everything or trap them forever. The Echo House is perfect for English learners looking to sharpen their listening skills while unraveling a dark, captivating mystery. Will you dare to listen? Chapter 1. The Key That Hung Alone. I remember the first time I saw it. The key. It was late October, the air heavy with the scent of damp leaves and distant bonfires. Rustling oaks lined Elmwood Street, their bare branches casting skeletal shadows that danced with the wind. I had been walking my dog, Benny, a scruffy terrier with more energy than sense, when something caught my eye. We were passing by that house, the one with peeling pale blue paint and a front lawn forever trapped between neglect and wild enchantment. Moss had overtaken most of the yard, sprawling over old flagstones and sinking roots into the gnarled base of a long-dead oak tree. Benny paused, his wet nose quivering, ears perked. My eyes followed his gaze to the front door of the house, where a brass key dangled from the doorknob. It swayed ever so slightly in the breeze, catching the late afternoon sunlight. "Huh," I muttered, more to myself than to Benny. Mr. Tobias, the reclusive old man who lived there, was said to have grown too frail to leave his home. Groceries and other necessities were handled by a rotating cast of caretakers, but surely one of them wouldn't leave a key hanging in the door? "Come on, Benny." I tugged gently at his leash, trying to shake the unease that settled like a rock in my chest. We moved on, Benny trotting beside me, his little paws tapping along the pavement. But I couldn't quite shake the feeling that I should have done something more. Still, we had our walk to finish, and like so many small, strange things in life, I let it drift from my mind. That is, until I saw it the next day. And the day after that. A full week passed, and the key remained, a fixture so unchanging it began to feel ominous. My curiosity, at first a mild distraction, grew into a gnawing obsession. Was it really so simple, a mistake left unchecked, an oversight by one of the caretakers? Yet, surely, someone would have noticed it by now. Then, there was Mr. Tobias himself to consider. Once, he had been a neighborhood fixture, greeting everyone with a warm wave and a booming laugh. But age and illness had turned him into a ghost in his own home, a rumor of a man glimpsed only through window blinds. The longer the key lingered, the more the house seemed to brood under its shadow. The old oak in the front yard, lifeless for as long as anyone could remember, seemed to bow ever so slightly. Benny began giving the place a wide berth, his hackles rising whenever we passed. On the morning of the 9th day, clouds swallowed the sun, blanketing the sky in a dull, heavy gray. I stood at my kitchen window, staring out at the house while sipping my too-bitter coffee. My wife, Sophie, bustled about behind me, humming a tune as she packed her work bag. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked, her voice wry but tinged with concern. I turned, startled. "What?" "The key," she said, shooting me a knowing look. "You keep staring out the window, and you've had that same furrowed brow all week." I managed a sheepish grin. Guilty as charged. It's just weird, you know, how it's still there. No one's touched it. Sophie crossed the room, resting a warm hand on my shoulder. Maybe one of the caretakers will notice eventually. Or maybe Mr. Tobias just likes it there. It's probably not worth losing sleep over. I nodded, though the unease in my gut told me otherwise. Sophie kissed me goodbye and left for work. Her laughter trailed behind her as she called out to Benny, who danced around her feet in a hopeful bid for attention. Later that afternoon, I decided enough was enough. Benny and I set out for our usual walk, but my mind was elsewhere. The street was hushed, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant buzz of a lawnmower. The neighborhood cat, a rotund tabby named Whiskers, lounged on a porch railing across the street. We stopped in front of Mr. Tobias's house. The key still hung in the doorknob, stubbornly glinting despite the overcast sky. My heart thudded in my chest as I approached the front steps. Benny whined softly, tugging at his leash, but I ignored him. I couldn't let this go, not anymore. I climbed the 3 creaky steps to the porch, the wood groaning beneath my weight. Up close, the key looked older than I had thought, its brass surface scratched and worn. I swallowed hard and reached out, my hand trembling slightly until my fingers brushed the cool metal of the key. I had just wrapped my hand around it when a strange noise made me freeze. It was faint, but distinct, the echo of distant voices, muffled, like a half-heard conversation carried on the wind. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But the street was empty, save for Whiskers, who had risen from his perch to watch me. My breath quickened. I glanced back at the door, suddenly hyper-aware of how quiet everything was. I should have let go of the key then. I should have walked away. Instead, I did something I would come to regret. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The inside of Mr. Tobias's house was shadowed, but not dark. Light seeped in through dusty curtains, casting a pale glow on the foyer. The air smelled of old wood and stale lavender, mingled with something else I couldn't quite place a hint of decay. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. Benny whimpered, pressing himself against my legs, his tail tucked between his haunches. "Mr. Tobias, are you home?" I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the click of the latch reverberating through the stillness. Almost immediately, the house seemed to shift, like a living thing drawing breath. The shadows deepened, and a cold draft swept through the hall. Then I saw them. 2 figures seated on the old oak staircase, illuminated by the soft light filtering in from the living room. Mr. Tobias sat hunched, his frail frame draped in a thick wool sweater, his hands trembling in his lap. Beside him was someone I hadn't expected to see, Angela Mendoza, the young vet tech who had gone missing 2 weeks ago. The whole town had been in an uproar, search parties combing the woods and posting her picture everywhere. Yet here she was, alive but haunted, her eyes wide and glassy. "Angela, Mr. Tobias?" I stepped forward, but they didn't move, their gazes fixed on me with a strange intensity. "What's going on?" Angela's voice was barely a whisper. "The key." My grip tightened around Benny's leash. "What do you mean?" "It's not ours," she said, her voice trembling. "Not mine. Not his." I glanced at Mr. Tobias, who let out a wheezing sigh. His eyes were dull, almost empty, but there was a flicker of something in them. Resignation, maybe. It belongs to him, he croaked. Who? My mind raced, trying to piece together this madness. Who are you talking about? Angela's lips parted, but before she could answer, the lights went out. A heavy, oppressive darkness swallowed the room, and Benny barked frantically. My pulse thundered in my ears as a whispery, inhuman voice slithered through the shadows. See? The voice rasped, chilling me to the bone. They're right. You're trapped. I spun around, and there he stood. A figure emerged from the gloom, tall and gaunt. His eyes glowed like embers. His skin was ashen, stretched over sharp cheekbones, and he wore a cloak made of leather and rusted chains. Keys dangled from every inch of him, clinking softly with each movement. Benny went silent, his body rigid with terror. My voice was gone, swallowed by fear. I forced myself to speak. Who are you? The creature's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. I am the keeper of the keys to your worst nightmares. He reached for a key that hung from his cloak, a slender thing with ornate carvings. His long, bony fingers closed around it as he held it out to me. This one is yours, he said, his voice like rusted hinges. Take it. Angela's voice trembled. Don't take it. Mr. Tobias echoed her plea. He's tricking you. No key will ever set you free. I clenched my jaw, refusing to be sucked into whatever twisted game this monster was playing. My only choice was to fight or outsmart him. Heart pounding, I looked back at the creature, determined to find a way out, whatever it took. And so began the nightmare. Chapter 2: The Stranger's Bargain. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sudden darkness seemed to wrap itself around the room. Weak shafts of dusty sunlight bled through the curtains, but they did little to pierce the heavy, oppressive gloom. Benny, my terrier, pressed himself so close to my leg that his body trembled against me. The world around us felt poised on the edge of something dreadful. I took in the scene. Mr. Tobias, frail and hunched, perched on the staircase like a forgotten relic. His eyes, sunken and rimmed with dark shadows, locked onto mine. Beside him was someone I hadn't expected to see, Angela Mendoza, the young vet tech who had vanished 2 weeks ago. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around her face, which was pale and tight with fear. Angela, I managed to whisper. My voice seemed to break the stillness, making the shadows shiver. What are you? How did you? My mind spun, trying to process her presence. She shook her head slowly, her hands trembling as she clutched at the worn fabric of her jeans. The key, she whispered, voice breaking. It brought me here. And now, it brought you. Mr. Tobias shifted, letting out a wheezy sigh. He looked as though he had aged decades in just weeks. We're all trapped, he murmured. Trapped by him. A chill slithered down my spine. Him, I echoed. Who are you talking about? Benny let out a low, uncertain whine. I glanced down, finding his eyes wide and terrified. My grip on his leash tightened, every instinct telling me to run. That thing, Angela whispered, her eyes darting toward the shadowed hallway that led deeper into the house. He comes and goes, bringing keys, making offers. Before I could ask what she meant, a cold draft swept through the room. Benny barked sharply, and every muscle in my body tensed as if bracing for impact. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, a thing of nightmares. Tall and gaunt, with eyes that burned like embers. His emaciated frame was draped in a grim tapestry of leather and rusted chains. Keys dangled from every inch of him, clinking with a chilling rhythm. The creature's skin was ashen, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, and his mouth twisted into a grin. Benny went silent, his small body rigid with terror. My own voice seemed to have fled me. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Who are you?" It spoke, its voice a rasp of dry leaves and rusted metal. "Welcome," it purred. Each syllable dragged through the air like a dull blade. "Care for a key to your darkest dreams?" Chapter 3. The Keeper's Offer. The monster's gaze swept over us, those burning red eyes igniting a primal terror in my chest. I stood paralyzed, clutching Benny's leash so hard my knuckles turned white. The terrier trembled against me, his small body tense, teeth bared in a helpless snarl. Mr. Tobias shuffled back, pressing himself against the cracked wall, while Angela crouched lower behind the sofa. The air was thick with dread, as if the shadows themselves were pressing in. The creature tilted its head, chains clinking. "Your pasts," it whispered. "Each of you has a key to it, a secret that binds you here." Benny growled, but it was a pitiful sound, swallowed quickly by the suffocating darkness. I tried to think, tried to grasp the nightmare unfolding around me, but the monster's presence unraveled coherent thought. It stretched out one long, bony hand from which dangled the key, a slender thing with ornate carvings. "Take it," it offered, voice sweetly venomous. "Face your nightmare, or stay here, lost to time." Angela's lips quivered. "I tried," she whispered. "It doesn't end. Each key leads to more horror." The creature's eyes narrowed, almost amused. "You think there's no end?" It chuckled, the sound rolling like a distant storm. "It ends when you are honest with yourself." My heart thundered. Honest with myself. What did that even mean? Fear and confusion twisted in my gut, but I couldn't afford to show weakness. Benny whined, and I knelt to reassure him, my voice shaking. "We're almost there, buddy," I whispered. The key in the creature's hand called to me, a mix of terror and temptation. "Make your choice," the creature said, its voice echoing, growing colder with every word. The keys never wait forever. Chapter 4. Into the Nightmare. Stepping through the doorway was like plunging into a living fever dream. The air changed instantly, thickening with a metallic tang that made each breath feel heavy. Benny cowered at my feet, his small body trembling so violently that I feared he'd collapse. The world around us twisted in impossible ways. Dark, gnarled trees loomed like ancient, tormented giants. Their branches stretched and curled against a blood-red sky. The wind howled, carrying faint, whispering voices. Shadows danced and twisted, never quite solid, never entirely gone. They seemed to watch us, hollow eyes dripping malice. I took a step forward, every muscle in my body screaming to turn back, but something drove me onward. Benny's leash tightened as he hesitated, pulling back, but I coaxed him forward with a whispered assurance. Then I saw them. Pale, skeletal figures emerged from the swirling mists, half-formed and wreathed in shadows. They whispered things that made my skin crawl, echoing my deepest fears and secrets. One of them reached out, its ghostly hand passing right through me, and I shuddered as a cold dread gripped my heart. The dark house on the hill drew my gaze, standing at the heart of this hellish landscape. It felt alive, each cracked shingle and shattered window radiating an ancient, malevolent energy. Somehow, I knew that whatever lay within those walls would answer the mystery of the keys, and possibly seal my fate. Benny let out a whimper, and I knelt to reassure him, my own voice shaking. "We're almost there, buddy," I whispered. But as I looked up, the shadows seemed to converge around the house. They pulsed with anticipation, as if daring me to take the final steps. Chapter 5: The Final Choice. The dark house loomed before me, its presence bending the landscape to its will. The door hung ajar, spilling out a blinding white light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Benny barked, his little voice a defiant cry in the face of so much darkness. I gripped his leash tighter, feeling the weight of his trust even as my own knees threatened to buckle. The skeletal shadows closed in, whispering my name, each syllable a breath of ice along my spine. But I couldn't falter now. I had come too far, and the only way out was through. The door beckoned, the light both inviting and threatening. As I approached, the house seemed to breathe. Its wooden frame groaned, the vines along the walls twisting and writhing like living things. Memories rose up, clawing at my mind. The loss, the guilt, the moments that had shaped and broken me. I reached the threshold, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Benny pressed against my leg, grounding me in the here and now. "What do you want from me?" I called out, my voice cracking. The shadows paused. Then he appeared, the keeper of the keys, stepping out from the darkened corners of the world. His ember eyes met mine, and he held up one final key, its obsidian surface catching the white light. "The choice," he said, his voice low and ancient, "has always been yours." My mind screamed to run, but I knew there was no escaping this. I thought of Angela, trapped in her own cycle of fear, of Mr. Tobias, clinging to a past he couldn't let go. I bent down, stroking Benny's fur, drawing strength from his trust. "It's time," I whispered. Standing tall, I stepped forward, taking the key. It burned cold in my hand. I placed it into the glowing lock. The door swung open, and the light consumed me. When the brilliance faded, I was in a small, sunlit room, my childhood bedroom. Memories flooded back, and in the middle of the room sat my father. His face was gentle, not twisted in the rage I had so often remembered. Tears streamed down my face. "I forgive you," I whispered, and the weight lifted. The room brightened, and my father's face softened into a warm smile. The door behind me reopened, this time with light that was welcoming. Benny barked and wagged his tail. I stepped back into the real world, blinking in the golden afternoon light. The twisted house was gone, replaced by an empty lot. Angela and Mr. Tobias stood nearby, bewildered but free. Angela met my eyes, her face wet with tears. Did you do it?" I nodded. "We faced it," I said, feeling peace I hadn't known in years. Mr. Tobias smiled faintly. "Thank you," he whispered, as if he could finally let go. And as we left that place, the nightmares no longer chasing us, I knew that some doors were meant to be opened. Not to trap us, but to set us free.